In the fall of 1981, the maple leaves in Maple Creek, Oregon, had just begun their transition from green to fiery red when 17-year-old Emily Rourke disappeared. The small logging town, nestled between dense forest and rolling hills, rarely saw tragedy. When it did, it lingered like morning fog in the valley. Emily had finished her evening shift at the Briar Hill Diner, a local establishment where truckers stopped for coffee and townspeople gathered for gossip. The diner's neon sign cast a blue-pink glow across the rain-slicked parking lot as she untied her apron and slipped it into her backpack alongside her sketchbook, a constant companion filled with charcoal drawings of faces, places, and the dreams that would carry her to art school in Portland next fall. "You sure you don't want a ride, Em?" asked Diane Fletcher, her co-worker, keys jingling in her hand. At 32, Diane had worked at the diner since she was Emily's age. She watched the girl with a mixture of admiration and concern. Emily reminded her of herself before life's disappointments had settled in. "I'm good," Emily said, adjusting her backpack strap. "It's only 15 minutes if I cut through the orchard." She tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, revealing a dangling silver earring shaped like a crescent moon. Diane frowned. "That old Caldwell place gives me the creeps. Especially at night." "It's just trees," Emily laughed, though something flickered across her face, a momentary hesitation. "Besides, there's that big harvest moon tonight. Practically daylight out there." The abandoned Caldwell orchard had once been the pride of Maple Creek, but after old Mr. Caldwell died and his children moved away, the land stood forgotten. Apple trees grew wild and unpruned, rusted farm equipment collected rainwater. Local teens used it for secret parties, and occasionally, drifters passing through town would sleep among the trees. "Suit yourself," Diane said. "Don't forget your art portfolio's due next week. You still need my help with those photographs?" Emily nodded. "Tomorrow after school. I'll bring my sketches." That was the last normal moment of Emily Rourke's life, 10:17 p.m. on October 14, 1981. Diane watched Emily walk away, her silhouette growing smaller against the backdrop of darkened storefronts, until she turned onto Elm Street toward the path that led through the orchard. Later, Diane would replay this moment thousands of times, wondering if she could have changed everything by insisting on that ride. By 7:30 the next morning, Robert and Helen Rourke had reported their daughter missing. Helen's voice cracked over the phone as she spoke to Sheriff Jim Galloway. "She always calls if she's staying at a friend's," Helen insisted. "She's never done this before, Jim." Galloway, who had known the Rourkes for 20 years, felt a chill despite his reassuring words. "Teenagers, Helen. But we'll send someone right over." Deputy Ray Mercer arrived at the Rourke home 30 minutes later. At 28, Mercer was the department's newest hire, having moved from Portland to escape the growing crime rate. He'd wanted the quiet life. Now, sitting in the Rourke's living room with its family photos and a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, he tried to look confident as he took notes. "When exactly did you last hear from Emily?" he asked. Robert Rourke, a high school science teacher with prematurely gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, clasped and unclasped his hands. "She called from the diner around 8. Said she'd be home after her shift ended at 10. And this shortcut she takes, can you show me on a map?" Helen brought out a town map and traced a line with her finger. "Through the old orchard here. She's been doing it since summer, says it saves her 10 minutes. By noon, a search party had gathered at the edge of the orchard. Neighbors, teachers, Emily's classmates, all moved through the overgrown trees calling her name. Sheriff Galloway brought in dogs from the county, who picked up her scent near the rusted gate at the orchard's south entrance. "She definitely came this way," the K-9 handler confirmed. The German shepherd strained at its leash, pulling them along a barely visible path winding between gnarled apple trees. But 50 yards in, near a small clearing, the dog grew confused, circling and whining. "He's lost the scent," the handler said, frowning. "It's like she vanished into thin air." 3 days into the search, 16-year-old Mark Bellamy, who had chemistry class with Emily, found a silver crescent moon earring half buried in mud near a drainage ditch that ran alongside the orchard. Hours later, another searcher discovered a torn backpack strap caught on a bramble 20 feet away. The items confirmed what everyone feared: something had happened to Emily in or near that orchard. Sheriff Galloway expanded the search radius and called in state police resources. Local news stations ran Emily's senior portrait, a smiling girl with intelligent eyes and a dimple in her left cheek. As days stretched into weeks, the investigation hit one dead end after another. Emily's wallet and house keys were found in the drainage ditch, but her sketchbook was never recovered. Deputies interviewed every diner employee and regular customer they could track down. There was this trucker, waitress Judy Mills remembered during her second interview. Big guy with a beard. Used to request Emily's section whenever he came through town. I remember thinking it was odd how he'd always find an excuse to chat with her. Did you get a name? License plate? Deputy Mercer asked, trying to hide his excitement. Judy shook her head. Just called himself Jack. Drove a blue semi, I think. Haven't seen him in a while now. The investigation also led to Dennis Beck, a 45-year-old maintenance worker at Maple Creek High School. Beck had a record, a bar fight that had escalated into an assault charge 5 years earlier, and lived in a cabin less than a mile from the orchard. Several students mentioned he'd been unusually friendly with Emily, complimenting her artwork displayed in the school hallway. Sheriff Galloway and Deputy Mercer questioned Beck in his cluttered living room, surrounded by fishing gear and model trains. I appreciate her talent, that's all, Beck said defensively, not meeting their eyes. I've never even spoken to her outside school grounds. Mind if we take a look around? Galloway asked casually. When Beck hesitated, the sheriff added, we can come back with a warrant. Beck's shoulders slumped. Go ahead. I got nothing to hide. They found nothing incriminating, though Deputy Mercer noted Beck's nervous demeanor throughout the search. Later that night, Beck's alibi checked out. He'd been at the Timber Lodge bar from 9 p.m. until closing at 2 a.m., confirmed by both the bartender and several patrons. As months passed, leads dwindled. The Rourkes appeared on regional television, pleading for information. Helen clutched one of Emily's charcoal drawings, a self-portrait that captured both her daughter's talent and the thoughtful intensity in her eyes. Someone knows something, Helen said directly into the camera, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. Please. She has so much life ahead of her. The town of Maple Creek changed after Emily's disappearance. Parents no longer allowed their children to walk alone after dark. The shortcut through the orchard went unused, overgrown with blackberry brambles and whispers. Some claimed to see a girl in a diner uniform walking among the trees on foggy nights, though no one would admit believing in ghosts. In the sheriff's office, Emily's case file grew thick with interviews, theories, and dead ends. Jim Galloway kept it in his desk drawer rather than filing it away with other cold cases. The photograph of Emily seemed to watch him, asking why he hadn't found the truth. Ray Mercer, whom Galloway had come to respect for his thoroughness, developed his own theory. I think it was someone passing through, he told Galloway late one night as they reviewed the case for the 100th time. Someone who saw her walking alone and took advantage. Maybe that trucker Judy mentioned. Then why haven't we found her? Galloway countered, rubbing his tired eyes. These hills aren't that big. Neither man voiced what they increasingly feared, that they never would. Years passed. The Rourkes divorced, the strain of their shared grief proving too heavy. Helen moved to Portland to be near her sister. Robert stayed in their family home, Emily's room untouched, as if preserving it might somehow bring her back. The town's memory of Emily began to fade, becoming a cautionary tale told to teenagers. Sheriff Galloway retired. Ray Mercer took his place, keeping the promise he'd made to never let Emily's case gather dust. In 1997, 16 years after Emily vanished, construction workers began clearing land for a new housing development near the old orchard. On a rainy April morning, an excavator operator named Dave Simmons noticed something unusual in the soil his machine had turned over, fabric that shouldn't have been buried 3 feet down. Work halted immediately. Sheriff Mercer arrived within minutes, his heart pounding as he approached the site. There, partially exposed by the excavator's bucket, lay a bundle wrapped in what appeared to be a plaid flannel shirt, the fabric degraded but recognizable. The county coroner confirmed what Mercer had known instantly: they had found Emily Rourke. Dental records matched perfectly. The remains showed evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull. The flannel shirt wasn't Emily's, it had belonged to her killer, a size XL men's shirt with no identifying labels. A renewed investigation began. Forensic techniques that hadn't existed in 1981 now offered new hope. DNA testing identified genetic material from 2 sources on the flannel shirt, one unknown male, and another partial match to someone once in the juvenile system, though the sample was too degraded for conclusive identification. Mercer personally drove to Portland to tell Helen Rourke. Now in her 60s, her hair completely silver, she opened her apartment door and knew immediately from his expression. "You found her," she said simply. "Yes, ma'am," Mercer replied. "I'm so sorry." Helen nodded slowly. "Did she suffer?" "The evidence suggests it was quick," he lied gently. The forensic report had indicated defense wounds on the remains. "The orchard," Helen said. It wasn't a question. "Nearby, yes." Helen invited him in and made tea with hands that trembled slightly. On her walls hung several framed charcoal drawings, Emily's work. One showed the diner at night, its neon sign the only color in the piece. "I've imagined 1,000 scenarios over the years," Helen said, stirring honey into her tea. "Each one worse than the last. At least now I know where she is. Will you find who did this?" "I won't stop trying," Mercer promised. The investigation reopened with intensity. Former classmates, now in their 30s with families of their own, were re-interviewed. Several remembered details they hadn't thought to mention years before. "There was this guy who'd hang around the school sometimes," said Michael Chong, once Emily's lab partner in chemistry. "Older guy, maybe 30s back then. He'd park across the street, just watching. I think Emily mentioned him once, said he'd offered her a ride home but she'd refused." Another former student, Lisa Barnett, remembered a conversation with Emily just days before she disappeared. "She showed me a page in her sketchbook, a man's face she'd drawn. Said he was a regular customer who'd asked if she could draw his portrait. I remember thinking he looked kind of intense. She'd captured something unsettling in his eyes." The sketchbook. Mercer had always wondered why it hadn't been found with Emily's other belongings. If she'd drawn her killer's face, it would explain why it had disappeared, taken as a precaution by someone who knew they could be identified by it. Dennis Beck, the maintenance worker questioned years ago, had died in a fishing accident in 1989. Some in town whispered that his death, falling from his boat and drowning despite being a strong swimmer, seemed convenient given the renewed interest in Emily's case after her remains were found. But Mercer knew coincidences happened, and Beck's alibi for the night of Emily's disappearance had been solid. The DNA evidence offered the most promising lead. The male profile didn't match anyone in the criminal database, but the partial juvenile sample shared certain markers with a family from eastern Washington. The trail had gone cold there until 2022, when new forensic genealogy techniques allowed investigators to narrow down the possible connections. By then, Ray Mercer had been retired for 5 years, but Emily's case still consumed him. At 71, with arthritic hands and reading glasses, he volunteered his time, poring over evidence he'd reviewed countless times before, looking for something, anything, he might have missed. On a Tuesday afternoon in September 2022, Mercer sat in the sheriff's department conference room surrounded by file boxes. The current sheriff, Andrea Watkins, who had been just 10 years old when Emily disappeared, had given him full access to the case materials. "I've been mapping locations," Mercer explained, showing her a detailed chart. "Every place connected to the case. The diner. The orchard. Where each piece of evidence was found. The burial site. He traced a pattern with his finger. There's something here I'm not seeing. Sheriff Watkins respected Mercer's dedication, though she privately wondered if the case would ever be solved. The genealogy team says they're getting closer to identifying the DNA. Should have results within months. Mercer nodded, but his attention had fixed on a photo from the initial search, the drainage ditch where Emily's earring and backpack strap were found. Something about the angle of the photograph triggered a memory. Did we ever check property records for that area? He asked suddenly. Not just the orchard, but the adjoining land. I'm not sure, Watkins admitted. The records would be in the county assessor's office. The following day, Mercer discovered that a small parcel of land bordering the orchard had changed hands multiple times since 1981. It had been purchased just 2 months before Emily's disappearance by a shell company that traced back to a trucking business based in eastern Washington, the same region linked to the DNA evidence. The owner was a man named Jackson Keeler, Mercer told Sheriff Watkins. Died in 2010. His company owned a fleet of blue semis that made regular runs through Maple Creek in the early 80s. Jack, Watkins murmured. The trucker Judy Mills mentioned. County records revealed Keeler had sold the property just 6 months after buying it, never developing it. His son, now managing the family business, agreed to DNA testing to assist the investigation. Results were pending. Meanwhile, a former employee at the Briar Hill Diner came forward after seeing a news story about the reopened investigation. Carl Vaughn had been a cook at the diner in 1981, with a juvenile record for breaking and entering that had been sealed when he turned 18. I saw her leave that night, he told investigators. I was smoking out back when she headed toward the orchard. But I wasn't the only one watching her. He described seeing a blue semi parked in the shadows beyond the diner's lot. A man got out after she passed. Followed her. I didn't think much of it then, figured maybe they knew each other. Why didn't you come forward before? Sheriff Watkins demanded. Vaughn looked away. I had a record. Was on probation. Didn't want to get involved with cops. He paused. And I was scared. The guy looked back once, saw me watching. The way he looked at me. I knew if I said anything, I'd be next. As the investigation continued, Ray Mercer spent more time at the sites connected to Emily's disappearance. One evening, he stood at the edge of what had once been the orchard, now a partially developed subdivision. The drainage ditch remained, though now lined with concrete and feeding into the development's water management system. Something about the angle of the sunset through the remaining trees sparked a thought. If Emily had been taking the shortcut home, and if her earring and backpack strap were found in the ditch, she must have deviated from her usual path. Why? The answer came to him as he traced the likely route. The property Keeler had briefly owned would have been visible from this spot, a small parcel with an old hunting cabin that had since been demolished. If someone had called to her from there, she might have approached, leaving the path. Mercer's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Sheriff Watkins. We got a match, she said without preamble. The DNA on the flannel shirt matches Jackson Keeler. And the partial juvenile sample? It's a familial match to Carl Vaughn. Mercer sat heavily on a nearby rock, the implications washing over him. They were working together. Looks that way. Vaughn's DNA was found in trace amounts, like he helped move the body. We're bringing him in now. Hours later, faced with the DNA evidence and the promise of leniency, Carl Vaughn confessed. As a 17-year-old with a record, he'd been desperate for money. Keeler had offered him $2,000 to help dispose of a problem. He claimed he hadn't known Emily would be killed, just that Keeler wanted to scare her for rejecting his advances at the diner. He took something from her backpack before we buried her, Vaughn admitted. A book of some kind. Said he needed to get rid of it because she'd drawn his picture in it. The sketchbook. Mercer had been right. What did he do with it? Watkins pressed. Burned it, I think. In the fireplace at that cabin he owned. Emily's case was officially closed, though her sketchbook was never recovered. Jackson Keeler had taken that final piece of evidence to his grave, and with it, Emily's last works of art. At a small ceremony in the Maple Creek Cemetery, Emily Rourke was finally laid to rest with dignity. Her mother Helen, now in her 70s, placed a charcoal pencil alongside the flowers on her daughter's casket. Ray Mercer stood at the back of the gathering, his promise fulfilled at last. Justice had come decades late, but it had come. As the autumn leaves fell around the mourners, the same fiery red as those that had fallen the year Emily disappeared, he thought about the evidence of her talent that had been destroyed. The drawings no one would ever see. The art she would never create. But he also thought about the sketch that had survived in her mother's apartment, the diner at night with its neon glow. It had captured not just a place, but a moment in time, preserved forever through Emily's eyes. Perhaps that was its own kind of justice. The case of Emily Rourke would remain in Maple Creek's memory, no longer an unsolved mystery, but a reminder that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, eventually find their way to light. Yet questions lingered. Had Keeler acted alone in other cases? Records showed his trucking route spanned 4 states over 20 years. Were there other sketches, other victims whose stories remained untold? And what of Vaughn's claim that he hadn't known Keeler's intentions? Could someone truly be blind to such darkness, or was it easier to claim ignorance than admit complicity? In the sheriff's office, Emily's case file was finally moved to the solved cases cabinet. But for Ray Mercer, and for a town that had lived under the shadow of her disappearance for 41 years, the echoes of that October night in 1981 would never completely fade.